So I'll paint some context over here for those who really get a lot of direct spinal loading in, like, let's go with our pros, right?
Yep.
I don't mind in the early off season for a guy who's fucking 280 or 290 linebacker if I need to get some sort of stimulus conditioning and we're dealing with a knee or an ankle, sure. But what he has is direct and indirect core loading for fucking 20 weeks of the regular season into the playoffs, right? So
Right.
again, painting context, but this is like, because the problem becomes like, let's think about our parents, right? We're looking mid to late 60s, early 70s, varying degrees of fitness across the board. If I were to put my mom in the pool, let's say, and have her train, better than no training? Sure.
Yeah.
Something that I want her doing in 2 years? No. Something I want her to help scale up to dealing with the forces of gravity? Yes. So
Right.
I think it's all about placing this on the spectrum of how one tolerates gravity. And I think what that might do is it might put you in a position where you actually become less tolerant if that's the only exertion is in a position where gravity isn't really doing what it's doing to you every other moment of the day.
Yeah, and I think you nailed it. That's the benefit of being in the water. It's load management. It's a manipulation of the way that your body's interacting with the gravitational forces that we're under 24/7 when we're not in the water. So that's a regression on land exercise, right? That's a regression. I need to figure out what the fuck Pilates is, but I'm pretty sure that Pilates like is on the same level because I think you're just laying down on this bed, like pulling handles and shit the whole
But
time.
there's other exercises where you're doing like pikes and shit. I've seen
Okay.
so I bet you they could, yeah. Like, I'm not defending it. I just think there
Okay.
there are, like, okay, I'm gonna shut up.
So all right, I'll do some research on what Pilates is. I'll tell you what it isn't. It's not what you want to be doing if you want to get strong. That's what
Fair,
it
fair,
isn't.
fair, fair play. Yeah, yeah.
But either way, either of those is a load management tool because we're not directly opposing the force of gravity with our body, and we're not necessarily using our core to create stability in a way that allows us to express force at our extremities against gravity. So that's what it's not. The way I'm picturing it, like I think it's called a reformer,
Mm.
like doing shit like that. Okay. And I'm sure there are ways where you can use it to be more advantageous and piking, yes, very difficult in terms of core musculature. But I think I think you said it perfectly. Is that this is a load management tool, and this is something like the water is something we're going to use when we need to decrease the way that the forces that gravity is acting upon our spine, our axial skeleton, and hence our core musculature. Now, there is a very real ceiling to progression with that. Even if it is piking on a Pilates reformers, yes, that's difficult, but what's the option over time? Instead of doing 30 seconds of piking, you do 60, you do 90, you do 34 minutes of piking. And once you get to that point, it's you've reached the upper end of how you can progress that, right? It's time and volume, yes, but there's going to be such a diminishing return once you get to that point that you've established a baseline of capacity to move, whether that's strength, whether that's endurance, that is no longer being challenged with that modality. So eventually there needs to be something that's going to allow you to interact with a greater proportion of gravity, and whether that is just being on dry land or whether that is getting off the Pilates reformer and putting a kettlebell in your hand or a dumbbell in your hand or a bar on your back. There's every single one of these tools is going to have a ceiling for progress, and that's kind of more so the statement or the idea that I was trying to refute, is that it's just because you do Pilates, it's not good for your core, right? It can be a vehicle to get you from point A to point B, but understanding that once you get to point B, there's no more room for progression on that. Just like the
Mm.
aquatic exercise, it's like yes, maybe there will be cardiovascular or cognitive benefits to doing something like that on a regular basis, but for you to continue to improve your fitness level, you're going to have a greater stimulus at some point. And the stimulus in which you can elicit to the core musculature, there's going to be a relatively low ceiling to those vehicles of exercise that maybe it takes you to a point where you'll be symptom free with whatever you're dealing with. Maybe you can function relatively well day to day, but training should eventually get to a point where it's going to be more difficult than the tasks that you're going to have to do on a day-to-day basis, whether that's life or whether that's catch a football 30 yards downfield.
Pilates is good for your core in the same way 6 cheeseburgers is good for the diet of someone who usually eats 7.
Right. Yes.
Right? It's like it's kind
I
of like 6 cheeseburgers is bad for everyone unless your normal diet is 7 cheeseburgers. Then 6 cheeseburgers is good. Like you know what I mean? It's
right.
it's
Yeah.
a it's unfortunately I think where we're at. If you're to look at the cross section of tables inside this, this metaphorical high school cafeteria and start to see just the number of training camps that have evolved, right? Like, and this could you could go across brands between a Barry's boot camp to Orange Theory to F45 to kettlebell specific work to you name it, powerlifting, Olympic weightlifting, into followers on Instagram of particular training apps or whatever. Like there's literally an infinite number of these things. When you're looking at how many of those tables have a training style that's intense enough for that our early conversation of like, hey, look, if you're not going to run into core issues, you're not going to run into training results, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of where
Yeah.
I maintain. It's like if you are not, and this is true at every level, at a
Yes.
certain point in my powerlifting career, what was the weak link was the midsection. It's really more of a physical problem of leverages and how we apply force through the arms and the legs and the axial skeleton. It's like inevitably this will always be the lever that's furthest away from the point that the force is applied, right? Like it's just the way, like unless the only time I can't think of a time where it would be unless I'm attaching weight onto my ribs or attaching weight onto my pelvis, which I wouldn't recommend. It's always going to have this longest lever where the force is going to magnify and accumulate in everything we do. So it's an odd proxy of effectiveness of an exercise program, but I think a proxy of effectiveness nonetheless is if you are looking at long-term programming of a particular brand of fitness and you don't foresee where the midsection might get compromised or where there is direct training to offset a compromise of the midsection, you're probably looking at something that's not going to be intense enough to really move some of these meaningful markers that you might be chasing of bone density, cholesterol, VO2 max, these things that are tied into longevity. So midline training is, I think, by that definition, a good proxy of efficacy. Is there going to be long-term potential for this type of training to wreak havoc at the lumbar spine, pelvis complex region? If yes, great. Great. We're dealing with something that's loadable, that has scalability and volume and intensity and endurance. That's good. That's good. That's good. Let's not avoid it because it has this inevitability. Let's talk about core training and how we can offset this so we can reap not only the benefit of this intense style training that's going to move the needle, but we can also preemptively lay down some foundation through the midsection so we can continue to do this intense enough activity for prolonged periods of time.